Hey everybody, and welcome back to General Psychology, and welcome to our first Psychology Update Live of the semester. Like I talked about at these Psychology Update Lives, rather than talking for, 5, 10, 20, or 30 minutes about something that I think is interesting, I take some time, as long as it takes, but really no more than an hour, to answer questions that you guys have. This one, of course, we're going to be talking about the material we've been tackling this week, having to do with drugs, consciousness, sleep, and altered states. But I'm also going to take some time to hit some pointers about getting ready for the upcoming test, about tackling your critical thinking, as well as some stuff like time management and stress management techniques. There's a lot of really cool stuff going on here, so just hang on, and if you are in the chat, go ahead and post questions as we go along here. If there's anything you want me to talk about more, or something that you want me to talk about instead, let me know, and I'll be there for you. First thing I want to do is I want to tell you guys about something that I've been using a lot to stay productive. I promise this isn't any monetizing or anything. I'm just really stoked to share it. The music that you got playing in the background here, it's good stuff, right? The music I've got playing in the background is courtesy of the Game Chops YouTube channel's Video Game Study Lounge. I know that a lot of us are big fans of the lo-fi hip-hop beats to study and relax to. That is still like one of my big-time go-tos, but I really like this one as somebody who's a big fan of video games in general. I really like the stuff that Game Chop specializes in. They're a record album that focuses on producing remixes, and especially like chiptune remixes of old school video game music. And I gotta say, like, even as somebody who doesn't recognize all the cuts that are on there, I really like the stuff that they do, and it's really good to like focus and zone out on stuff like that. So give them a listen and tell them what songs you like on their station, because they like that. That's one of my big tips. Something I've been enjoying that helps keep me productive is listening to some good music that gets me pumped while I'm trying to get stuff done. But to talk about the things that you guys want to talk about, today we are going to take a little bit of time, and we're going to go through the Q&A and wrap up with some class tips. In the Q&A, I got a ton of really good questions. We're going to start off by talking about sleep quality, how to sleep better, and what it is we struggle with when it comes to sleep. But we'll also take time to talk about some of the more mysterious elements of sleep, like dreams, other states of consciousness, as well as what it is that can cause other states of consciousness, like drugs and drug usage, meditation, out-of-body experiences, as well as some like just kind of out there questions that I was really excited to get, and I am excited to talk about too. One of the things you'll notice if I don't get to your question specifically is just because there were some really good and popular questions that I get, like 4, 5, 6 questions that all kind of hit on the same thing, and I'll try to summarize those, hit that same point. But if I don't answer your question, of course, just like pop in the chat, let me know, and ask me to expound on it a little bit more, or you can go ahead and hit me up later and ask me specifically, that you'd like me to talk a little bit more about that. Let me get our background music down just a little bit there so that we can talk a little bit more easily. One of the biggest questions I got had to do with sleep quality, and I think a question that really gets us going says, what are some things you can do to help you fall asleep if you have trouble? I think we've all been there, that you get caught in a moment where you've got something really big coming up the next day, and it seems like your motivation for going to bed early, getting ready to go, is that you want to get more sleep. But that very same motivation is what keeps you from being able to sleep in the first place. In these moments of desperation, we want to do whatever we can to try to sleep better, but it turns out that desperation is the very thing making it hard for us to sleep. So what do a lot of people do in order to sleep better? Well, a lot of the choices they make are not really fantastic, and some of our questions hit on this, asking about natural remedies to help us sleep, or asking about ways to sleep that asking about ways to get to sleep that weren't problematic. And that's because a lot of us might know people who do things like drink alcohol or use drugs or take something like Ambien to try to sleep, a prescription sleep medication. The big problem with any of these is that not only do they disrupt your precious and fragile and delicate sleep cycle, what Russell Foster talks about as being really essential to our overall health, but also, even though they produce a state of unconsciousness, you're still, you're quiet, you don't respond to the world around you, that doesn't necessarily mean that that's sleep. When you drink enough alcohol that you black out, for example, you may pass out the same way you do do, like when you get hit in the head, but that doesn't mean that you're having a nice, restful nap. And we see that people who drink heavily in order to be able to sleep don't get the same kinds of sleep benefits. Not only are they not getting the sleep benefits that you get from real sleep, but also you have big time consequences later, apart from the problematic addiction issues, right? And the fact that we're using a self-medicating coping mechanism. We'll talk more about this stuff later in the semester. It's also the issue that, the alcohol use itself can cause problems. Not only will it cause issues with like your metabolism and ingesting all these empty carbs, it makes you more likely to suffer from things like sleep apnea and snoring and sleep paralysis and bad dreams. Plus, when that alcohol wears off in the middle of the night, you can get a bit of a rebound and wake up 3 or 4 hours later with having a really hard time waking back up. If you drink heavily enough, you'll have a really hard time waking up the next day too, because you're, hungover, right? That's a result of using substance and then experiencing withdrawal from it. Alcohol is another side effect, which is that in addition to making you drunk, it's also a diuretic. This is why a lot of times when people drink heavily, they have to go to the bathroom a lot. This will disrupt your sleep by making you have to go to the bathroom really bad in the middle of the night, and that'll disrupt your sleep too. When you experience a hangover the next morning, hopefully you guys are not experiencing hangovers, but if you're experiencing a hangover the next morning, that's not just withdrawal like you get the shakes or the DTs from drinking heavily and then quitting right away, but really most of that hangover effect is a result of really pronounced dehydration because you drank all this alcohol that went through your system and took a ton of water with it. This is why, like, no matter what kind of hangover remedy or hangover cure people swear by, one of the very best things you can do is drink more water. I'm not just being a hydro homie here, but I really like drinking enough water is something that most of us don't do, and doing it is an easy fix that, makes things way better. So also something like Ambien. There are a lot of people who swear by Ambien because frankly, they don't feel that they have any other option. I have family members like this. They can't afford to take the lifestyle steps that people like Russell Foster argue that we should, and so they turn to doing something like taking Ambien before going to bed. It is the same issue that alcohol does. It produces unconsciousness, but not sleep, but has other effects that people taking this hypnotic can get up in the middle of the night and engage in problematic behaviors, but it's also habit forming, meaning that if you weren't having trouble sleeping before you started taking it, you definitely do now. So how is it that we can be able to sleep better? Well, the problem is the solutions aren't necessarily easy. The same way that we ask like, well, what's a good way to lose weight or get in shape or learn my psychology material? The answers are usually more difficult and they take longer to do. And one of the biggest things we can do if we want to sleep better is to fix our sleep schedule. Now, oftentimes we don't think about this until it's too late, right? It's the middle of the night and I need to get to sleep now. That's really tough. In the long term, what we want to do is come up with a plan to have a consistent sleep schedule where we go to bed at the same time, we wake up at the same time, we get enough sleep, and we do relaxing things before bed to help us wind down, as well as avoiding things like using stimulants like coffee or nicotine before going to bed, or doing things like exercising right before bed. It might make your body tired, but it makes your brain loaded with endorphins, which helps you stay awake. For those of you, too, thinking that, like, well, I drink coffee and it makes me tired, it's not that, like, caffeine doesn't work on you. It's that caffeine, like alcohol, is a diuretic. And even though caffeine is a stimulant, one of the first symptoms of dehydration is sleepiness. What you'll find is that if you drink a lot of coffee, especially something like espresso that doesn't have a high water content in it, and then you follow it up like with some water, you'll feel way more alert than you did before. So one of the best things we can do is to establish a really good sleep schedule with a room that you follow Russell Foster's advice. I know I keep talking about this guy a bunch, but if you follow his advice and you have a dark room where you don't do anything else and it's really quiet, that's going to be the best way to sleep well. But for the first night, it's not going to feel very good, right? It's going to feel different, and we don't like stuff that feels different. It's like the first time you try to study in a quiet room or you go to a new school. That new setting is really tough and makes you feel too alert and you don't feel comfortable. You don't feel good falling asleep, especially if you're used to like sleeping with a TV or radio on or something like that. So you can hear maybe somebody in the background who is also not happy right now. But establishing that schedule is really good for the long term. In the short term, one of the best things you can do is find ways to overcome that anxiety. One of my favorite ways to do this is to take a warm shower. So if I'm feeling stressed out in particular, a nice hot shower, I get it as hot as I can stand it, is a really great way to relax. I'll put on some nice quiet music, like the video game study lounge, or what the lo-fi R&B beats to relax and study to, right? So I relax to something like that, or I listen to a nice quiet podcast. There's a really great one called Sleep With Me that's about boring you to sleep. Well, I take a hot shower and then get in bed. Not only is the hot shower relaxing, but when your body cools off after being overheated in the shower, that cooling off is a signal to your body to go to sleep, and it'll make it easier for you to sleep. Also, making sure that your room is nice and cool, that'll help. Cold is a signal for sleep, whereas hot is a signal to stay awake. If your roommates, your apartment complex, or your parents won't let you cool it off, try not using as heavy a blanket, or sticking like one leg out of that blanket so that you can cool down a little bit too. Also, a comfortable pillow and a comfortable mattress are good ways to relax. A mattress is really expensive, and pillows are really expensive too. But if it's possible to save up for it, we want to remember we spend about a third of our lives sleeping, and we really want to make it good because we pay prices when we don't sleep well. One of the last things you can do if you really want to be able to sleep well and sleep in the long term effectively is to take melatonin. A lot of students I've spoken with take melatonin and get frustrated because it doesn't make them sleepy. And then they're disappointed to learn that, well, that's not really how melatonin works. Remember, melatonin is the hormone that your brain produces to help you sleep. And when you take it consistently at the same time every night, it's a signal to your brain that that is bedtime. Melatonin doesn't make you sleepy, but it does help you reset your sleep cycle. It can be really hard to adjust things like our sleep cycle. The students I've spoken with who are trying to do that as part of their change project, it is really hard to do, but it's absolutely worth it. As someone who has been through horrible chronic sleep deprivation, when Grady was born, for the first 8 months of his life, I didn't sleep more than 3.5 hours a night. As somebody who's been through that, I cannot tell you how much better of a human being I am when I get 7 to 8 hours of sleep a night. Of course, if you find that you're sleeping way more than 7 or 8 hours of sleep, that might be something worth going and talking to your doctor about too, because that's a sign potentially that you've got something going on, like with your thyroid, something that's really easy to fix with medication, but is worth taking a look at to make sure that your health is all right. Another thing, if you are somebody who likes to listen to the radio or have the TV on while you sleep, these are not particularly good because they often wake you up through the night. One of our next questions says, why do I wake up multiple times in the night? Part of that can be noise in the background. We are diurnal creatures meant to survive during the day. At night, we are afraid of predators coming and killing us. So little noises in the background that normally wouldn't bother us during the day tend to wake us up, or at least bring us up into less restful stages of sleep. So noise, your TV, flashing lights, stuff like that can make it really tough to sleep. Instead of using music, where you get these periods of quiet and calm either within the songs or between them, or the TV, where you've got changes in volume and the flashing lights, one of the things I really like to use is white noise. I'm going to give you a demo of white noise here in a second, but I really like white noise because it is literally every frequency that you can hear all at once. And the result is this is the kind of technology that they use in active noise canceling headphones because it blocks out all of the noise outside. We use this when Grady sleeps so he can't hear us like banging around and listening to our garbage TV in the evenings. But I use it when I sleep because I don't want noises in the background to wake me up. I'm going to play a little bit of white noise here in just 1 second. And then let me see if I can get this going here. I'm going to play just a little bit of white noise really quickly here, and then we'll get back to listening to our music really quick. Okay, sorry guys, this is, God, you want to talk about amateur hour? I had it all ready to go. The one I'm going to go for is literally the first result that you get when you look for white noise, and it's called white noise black screen, meant to help people sleep. I'm going to go ahead and play that and crank it up so you can hear it just fine. All right, so I hope you guys got like a little taste of what that white noise sounds like there. I know I played it for just a second. I'll bring it up here one more time so you guys can hear it. Okay, so I know like that probably sounds like wind, or it sounds like a fan in the background, or it sounds like rain. And there's a reason why we find all this stuff so relaxing. It's this kind of like consistent noise that's there in the background that we can easily kind of ignore and get out of our heads, right? And that's what we're trying to do here, right? Is get that sound that can be in the background, but we can get it out of our heads. White noise is a really fantastic way to sleep. There are really great free apps available for Android or iPhone, or you can play it on YouTube in the background. That's something that I find really helpful. Our next set of questions has to do with our sleep schedules. Why is it that whenever I oversleep, I feel more tired than when I sleep only 8 hours or so, or even less? There are a lot of people who ask questions about this, like, why do I feel tired in the morning even when I slept all night? Why do I feel tired when I sleep too much? And this is because when we feel tired, it's not just about the amount of sleep that we get. We've been really poorly served by healthcare professionals who argue that you need to get 7 or 8 hours of sleep every night. This is true, but the schedule you sleep on is just as important, if not more important. Remember that your body and your brain get used to this idea of going to sleep at the same time every night and then waking up at the same time every night, right? Go to sleep, wake up, go to sleep, wake up. And as a result, like when you wake up, if somebody were to get you up at like 2 o'clock in the morning to get on a flight or go on a drive somewhere, you feel tired and like you can't wake up. And that's because your brain is full of sleep chemicals meant to help you stay quiet and still and rested. And then in the morning, if you wake up at the same time every single morning, eventually you get to where you don't even need that clock to wake you up because that chemical cortisol is waking you up in the morning before your alarm even goes off. What this means is that if you get 7 or 8 hours of sleep, but you're waking up at a time where like on the weekends you'd normally be sleeping, you're waking up in the middle of what your body thinks is the night. So a lot of people feel tired after sleeping enough if their sleep schedule is off, but then they'll do something like take a nap to try to make things better, right? And this is where I get to intro one of my favorite pieces of sleep advice. When you take a nap, and naps are not great because they can throw off your sleep schedule, but when you do take a nap, you want to make sure that that nap is of an appropriate length. Some people here ask, like, why is it that if you take a 15-minute nap, you feel more alert than if you take an hour or a 2-hour nap? And it's because once you go past like 15 or 20 minutes, you start to enter deeper stages of sleep where your body's like, okay, I got it. I know what you're trying to tell me. It is the middle of the night and it's time to sleep. And trying to wake up after an hour or 2-hour nap, it's easy. Like, I feel out of place. Like, I have no idea who I am, much less where I am or what time it is, because my body and brain are built for it to be the middle of the night. But a 20-minute nap is perfect because it's enough for you to get a little bit of rest to clear out those sleep chemicals in your brain, but not so much that you end up thinking it's the middle of the night. In fact, my favorite version of the brief nap is called a caffeine nap. What I really like to do is to make a little cup of really strong coffee, get something like espresso. You can get it at Starbucks or you can make it at home. I've got this like cool little, like it was cheap on Amazon, but this cool little like handheld espresso maker. And I'll draw myself like a little shot of espresso, put some ice in that bad boy, crushed up ice. So it's nice and cold. You can drink it real quick. I'll go ahead and I'll take my warm shower. I'll put on my comfy clothes to take my nap, and then I will slam that espresso shot and get in bed. And the idea is you can set a 20-minute timer, and when that 20 minutes is up, 20 minutes is just about how long it takes for caffeine to have a full effect on your body. You jump out of bed, you wake up, that caffeine is kicking in, and you're ready to take on the rest of the day. Now, you might be saying, that's not enough time for me to get my rest. And what a sleep scientist like Russell Foster would tell you is that's not when you should be getting your rest because you're not getting the full reward out of it. So instead of taking a 2 or 3 hour nap, why don't we go to bed 2 or 3 hours earlier and then take a 15-minute nap? These can be really hard changes to make though, so if you ever want to talk about it, come and talk to me. Our last sleep schedule related question says, why is it easier for me to sleep when I'm not tired? And then when I'm tired, I have trouble. It's because of the pressure, right? Performance anxiety is alive and well, whether it's in your speech class or in the bedroom for nap time or other stuff, right? The idea is that when you put a lot of pressure on, you're like, now I need to sleep. It's really hard. So finding ways to kind of ease into that sleep are good. Build a consistent routine that reminds you of bedtime. This isn't just for me. We do it with Grady too. We have this consistent routine we follow every single night so that everything about it reminds his body and his brain that it's time to go to sleep. You need it too. Cutting out screen time ahead of time. Reading in a physical book, especially a boring book. There's a book that I use whenever I feel like I'm having a hard time sleeping because it is so goddamn boring. It's just the worst. But the result is, like, I get really tired reading it and fall asleep. But doing things like that to make bedtime, like really working to make bedtime about sleep, that is really, really critical, right? Russell Foster talks about this stuff a bunch, but setting up a good schedule and making your bedroom a place where all you do is, well, you do like 2 things. One of them is sleep, right? That's a really good way to do it. If you're somebody who like you have to use your bedroom for work, that's really tough because you know that your body and brain associate that work with stress, and just being in there will be stressful, right? But finding ways to chill out, calm down, de-stress. Last thing, you wouldn't think about like what you do in the morning having much of an impact on what happens at night, but Making sure that you exercise first thing in the morning, getting a little bit of aerobic exercise in the morning is significantly associated with getting better sleep later at night, which is pretty cool. So let's move on from talking about sleep quality to talking about some of the things that happen at night. It is wild how little we know about what happens at night, given that we spend a third of our lives doing this stuff. It's kind of like how everybody dies of old age, but we don't really know what aging is. Crazy stuff, right? I have a handful of questions here that kind of sum up the deluge of dreaming-related questions that I got. The first one asks, are our dreams made from our subconscious during sleep, or are there other factors that cause them? I think the core question here is, what are dreams? And the answer is, we don't really know. There are theories that your dreams are a way for you to improve the quality of your memories and skills. The Tetris effect is an example of this. Back in the 70s, it was identified that people who played Tetris for long periods during the day were better at Tetris the next morning when they woke up, as if they'd been practicing in their sleep. And they did. I've had this happen to me before, that when I engage in really intense work on something over the course of a day, like doing math or chemistry, or even working on the technology setup I have here, I dream these like shifting patterns over the course of the night, and it doesn't feel really restful. But when I wake up, it's like I understand things I wouldn't have understood before. And that is exactly what they call the Tetris effect, right? That it's like you're practicing stuff at night. Other ideas are that dreaming is a way for you to sort through your memories during the day, to deal with unconscious issues, or that it's just an accident of what's happening. That like there is this like biological repair that needs to happen in the middle of the night, and dreaming is just like a result of that repair going on. We don't really know. But I think that there's a lot about dreaming that's like it's not hard to understand. If you just went through a horrible breakup and you relive that breakup at night while you're dreaming, that's probably not surprising. If you're really worried about doing well on a test and you have a dream that you do poorly on the test, that's not surprising. Generally speaking, we find that if you have a balanced diet, you exercise regularly, you don't drink caffeine before bed, and you lower your stress level before going to bed, you'll have way better dreams than if you don't do those things. So if you want to have good dreams, then taking care of yourself is really key. The next question, I have a question about the brain. How does it somehow make people sleep talk and sleepwalk? Where does this come from? Sleepwalking, also known as sleepwalking is somnambulism, like to ambulate, and sleep talking is somniloquy, like soliloquies. Sleep talking and sleepwalking are kind of like accidents that happen. At night, there's this part of your brain that shuts down, kind of like a gate. It's called the reticular formation, and it keeps information from the outside world from getting into your brain and waking you up, but it also keeps information from your brain. It keeps that information from going out to your body and moving you around all over the place, because like you're in the middle of dreaming. And when that gets disrupted, people tend to take that stuff that's happening in their dreams and it enters the world outside. And what that can mean is like your dog is having a dream and like kicking and running in bed, right? It could be you talking in the middle of the night about a dream you're having, or it could be like you getting up and going to the fridge and peeing on the floor. Whoops. But either way, it's like that gate isn't closed entirely. And generally what we tend to find is that the sorts of things that disrupt sleep in general also disrupt that gate, that reticular formation, and get in the way. So you're more likely to sleepwalk and sleep talk if you are using stimulants before bed, drinking coffee or tea or soda or smoking. If you're really stressed out, if your sleep schedule is inconsistent, if you're sleeping too much or too little, or if you're going through a big significant life change. Oftentimes when people go through puberty, they experience this more than they do at other periods in their lives. It's nothing to be worried about, and if you ever experience somebody who's sleepwalking or sleep talking, you don't have to worry about waking them up. That's not going to do any damage. Just help them back to bed where they'll be safe, and don't be offended by anything they say or do, because it's just a dream. They can't really control it. Excuse me. I got a lot. Wowzers. I got a lot of questions about sleep paralysis, and I couldn't remember if I mentioned sleep paralysis in the prompt or if this just came up, but man, I was surprised, and I get questions about sleep paralysis all the time anyway. If you've had sleep paralysis but you didn't know it was called this, it's probably nice to have a name for what's going on, and you're probably not surprised by that name. If you've never had it, it is pretty much exactly what it sounds like, that you're either going to sleep or you are waking up from sleep. You open your eyes, you wake up, but you can't move. No matter what you do, you are paralyzed in your own bed. This is different from like when you fall asleep on your arm. I've had this happen before. I'll fall asleep on one or both of my arms, and then I can't move them because of the loss of circulation. That sucks too, but not as bad as this. Sleep paralysis is connected with things like out-of-body experiences, which we'll talk about in just a little bit. But sleep paralysis is also a result of that kind of like reticular formation not working very well. The information from the outside world can come into your brain, but you can't get information back out to get your body to move around and wake you up fully. The entire answer is a little more complicated because it's also connected to the way that dreams work. Oftentimes people experiencing sleep paralysis, they'll open their eyes, look around the room, and see things like a dark presence or a dark figure. But in sleep studies, we've seen that these people never actually open their eyes. And the same phenomenon really explains this, that your sleep paralysis is an experience that is a liminal experience on the edges of sleep and waking. It's part sleep, part waking, so that you can tell you're in your bed, you can feel that you're in your bed, or even hear a little bit, but because you're on the edge of dreaming, you can craft the experience of being in your bedroom and what you hear and what you see without actually seeing or hearing those things. And this is where it sounds like talking voices or seeing things in your room come from. But here's the issue. Like, being paralyzed, I would find to be really, really stressful, right? And when you're stressed, you have bad dreams. And if you feel like you're paralyzed, the bad dream you're going to have is like a presence in the room with you and whispering voices and stuff like that. If you ever find yourself experiencing sleep paralysis, it's not life-threatening, it's not dangerous. If you can relax and then try to move your fingers and toes and move your hands and legs, eventually you'll break right out of it. If you've experienced this, chances are it was at a point where you're having higher than normal stress, sleeping too much, or sleeping too little. Sometimes people experience this during hypnagogia, that point where you're going to sleep, like starting to fall asleep, and you'll go through it again and again and again. If that starts to happen or you're worried about it, the best thing you can do is break out of the cycle by getting up, getting a glass of water, something like that, and then going on back to bed. I said that this was linked to out-of-body experiences. Our best explanation for alien abductions that happen in the middle of the night as well as out-of-body experiences is that they are the same thing as sleep paralysis. That you kind of take sleep paralysis and you connect it with lucid dreaming, which are dreams that you can control, right? And you end up getting out-of-body experiences. A lucid dream is a dream that you can control, and usually it happens because you become aware of the fact that it's a dream, that you can use one of any number of triggers. Sometimes people practice for weeks or months to get to that point. They'll do something like wear a rubber band around their wrist and get used to the habit of looking at their wrist, right, to check and see if it's a dream. So that you do it out of habit and dream. You'll look at your wrist, you're like, why am I looking at my wrist? And you say, oh, to check for a dream. Oh my God, I'm in a dream, and now you can control it. But that kind of conscious awareness going with like the crafting of this imaginary world in your head can sometimes lead to the kinds of experiences that we call out-of-body experiences or alien abductions. Of course, this leads to the natural question, how do I know that they're not actually out-of-body experiences? You're not floating away from your body and taking your spirit to Paris. Of course, I don't have evidence that that's not really happening, but there are people who research this regularly, and they do the kinds of tests that you'd expect. One of my favorite, and this leads me to a plug for one of my favorite podcasts ever, it's called Oh No, Ross and Carrie. Oh No, Ross and Carrie is a podcast where a couple of skeptics, a journalist, and this guy who's an animator at Disney, of all things, they investigate claims of the paranormal, fringe science, cults, stuff like that. And in one of them, they did the series where they went and did out-of-body experiences. And that's where I learned that every year there's a conference where people go to try to compete in out-of-body experience stuff, including like they all go stay in a hotel, and then in this one room in the hotel, they'll put an object, and everybody's supposed to engage and try to do this like spirit projection out-of-body experience thing, go see what the object is in the room, and if they can guess correctly, they win a prize. Nobody has ever won this contest, because out-of-body experiences aren't people actually getting out of their bodies. The same thing like with alien abductions. One of the things we'll be talking about next week is this like idea of scientific or critical thinking. Science cannot prove that those are not alien abductions. But the burden of proof isn't really on science to disprove it, right? It's on the person making the outrageous claim to provide evidence that really seems to support it. Lots of things happen that I think happen a certain way that they didn't. It's not just alien abductions. It's also like an argument that we have that I know that I'm right even when I'm horribly wrong. And the burden would be on me to find proof that I'm correct, right? So because of this stuff, we can conclude that, you know, sleep paralysis, out-of-body experiences, alien abductions, stuff like that seems to be connected in this really interesting way that your brain is able to create realities that may not actually be happening. If you find that you are dealing with stuff like this, usually it's a sign that there's something else going on below the surface. And a really cool thing you can do is to, of course, like talk with me, but also to talk with the free and confidential counseling center that you are already paying for by being a Santa Fe student. Counseling.sfcollege.edu or sfcollege.edu/counseling. Either one will get you to the counseling center. They do phone counseling, Zoom counseling, and they might be having some in-person office hours later this semester. So that's a lot of stuff about sleep. We've also got some interesting questions about drugs, altered states, and animal consciousness coming up here in a minute. The drug discussion is a really interesting one, and even before we get to a discussion of what these questions are, I think something that's really important to hit is that like our feelings about drugs are not medical or biological or scientific in nature. The difference between an illicit drug, like an illegal drug, an over-the-counter medication, a prescription medication, these are legal and cultural beliefs, right? These are the differences. Medically, there is little to separate an illicit drug from a prescription drug from an over-the-counter drug. And so when we talk about drugs and drug usage, and in terms of like what we mean, it becomes a really tricky issue. If we look at stuff like, Xanax and Ambien, these are drugs that are used for people, who are experiencing psychological, behavioral, or lifestyle difficulties, but they're also drugs that can be abused. A lot of illicit drugs start as prescription drugs or vice versa, or they're drugs that were used for one thing and end up being used for another thing entirely. But one of the reasons we talk about drugs here is that medications are one way. Ingestible stuff, too, is a way that we can change our states of consciousness. Normally, we tend to think of consciousness as like either you're totally alert or you're unconscious, but we also know that like sleep is a state of consciousness. There are heightened states of awareness you get from stimulants or lowered states of awareness you get from depressants, and then hallucinogens and hypnotics do things to change our states of consciousness. Some of these drugs we understand really well, and other ones we really don't. Some of these drugs we thought were really helpful, like Ambien, and maybe aren't. Other ones have been illicit for a really long time, like LSD, also known as lysergic acid, and psilocybin, which is found in mushrooms, or the tetrahydrocannabinol found in marijuana. Any of these might actually have some legitimate medical applications. At the same time, though, I know there's a groundswell of support for like the recreational use of these drugs. And just because they might be less harmful than something like alcohol, it doesn't mean that anyone in the medical and scientific community encourages their recreational use, right? Like as a psychologist who knows that, drug use by psychologically at-risk individuals is ill-advised, I cannot in good faith recommend that like anybody, use marijuana or take LSD or use shrooms or, roll on Molly or use cocaine or drink coffee, right? Like it's really tough to recommend any of this stuff, even though like I might drink coffee myself. So our first question about drugs: how much effect does addiction actually have on the brain? And this is a little bit of a tricky question because the answer is a lot, even though we don't fully understand all of it. When you're dealing with somebody who is addicted to a substance, we need to remember that that addiction has structurally, fundamentally changed the way that their brain works, but that a lot of times the ways that we try to fix these addictions doesn't really work. For example, there is not a ton of evidence that 12-step programs work, and in fact, there's a lot of evidence that 12-step programs don't. 12-step programs are like Alcoholics Anonymous or Narcotics Anonymous. They have about an 8% success rate, so fewer than 1 in 10 people who make use of these programs successfully kick the habit. Part of this is that you can never really kick it if you're in one of these programs, but also the way that they go about it. Instead, working with a licensed psychologist and psychiatrist is a really great way to kick these habits. But addiction changes things in really big ways. One of the biggest ways is through the use of tolerance. If you're somebody who drinks caffeine or smokes nicotine or drinks alcohol, you've noticed that it takes more and more each time to get the same effect. And that's because your body notices. It's like, oh, yo, dog, I can see you're like using caffeine to be alert, so I don't need to keep making you alert all on my own. I'll cut down on the like alertness chemicals that I give you, which is a problem because then you have to use more to catch up and then feel particularly alert. And in fact, we get to a point where like in the morning, I have to have coffee every single morning. But if I'm honest with myself, I'm not drinking coffee to help me wake up. What I'm doing is I'm drinking coffee to help me overcome the withdrawal effects of not having had coffee in a while, right? So that's one of the problems with the way that addiction works. You get this like tolerance effect. Now, of course, there are side effects themselves, but tolerance is one of the biggest ways that we see like withdrawal symptoms working. Withdrawal symptoms are one of the biggest ways that we say like an addiction is happening, and why in a lot of cases we say that marijuana is not chemically addictive, because we don't really identify withdrawal symptoms. But because it's something that does produce a mild sense of euphoria, it is still habit forming and can be problematic in a host of ways. If you're having a hard time functioning on a daily basis without smoking, drinking, or using a drug like marijuana, it's likely that it's interfering with your interpersonal relationships and stuff, and that's problematic too. Again, working with a licensed psychologist is the #1 most effective way to quit addiction. Can long-term consumption of caffeine have an impact on your brain, and can it permanently hinder your ability to sleep normally? We don't know enough about the lifelong effects to know for sure whether it is going to cause, big problems or not. We do know that there are problematic effects long-term for kids drinking caffeine, the same way you don't want kids drinking alcohol. You don't really want them drinking caffeine. It can exacerbate issues related to ADD and ADHD, stunt their growth, affect your metabolism, stuff like that. And in terms of like sleep and attention effects, like it's entirely possible that there are problematic effects there too. In terms of hindering your ability to sleep normally, it's possible to drink caffeine and sleep normally as long as you use the caffeine responsibly. You drink it first thing in the morning, you don't use it right before bed, and if you can do something like go from coffee to black tea to green tea, that's even better. Because not only does tea have less caffeine in it than coffee does, coffee, when you ingest it, you tend to ingest a bunch of caffeine really quickly and then go through a crash, leading to you needing more. Whereas the curve for you experiencing caffeine from tea is a lot gentler. It lasts a lot longer, and you don't get that pronounced high and then crash right away. Also, where you get your caffeine matters. Certain retailers, like Starbucks, are known for having more caffeine than other outlets do, so that you really feel that boost. And when you drink something that's not Starbucks, you don't feel like you got the boost you're used to. So you go back. So in general, caffeine isn't necessarily horrible. It's the most, socially acceptable drug that we have right now. But also, like, if you could avoid getting on the habit, why would you get on it? Why does the body get addicted to certain drugs quicker than others? Is our last drug-related question. The short answer is I don't really know, but we do know that the most addictive drugs not only experience, like, they produce tolerance effects and cause withdrawal effects, but they also tend to produce a heightened euphoria. This is why things like painkillers, opiates are particularly problematic, that they make you feel really, really good. That same kind of endorphin rush. In fact, endorphin just means endogenous morphine. It's literally morphine made by your body. That endorphin rush is similar to the rush you get from painkillers, except the painkiller ones are really, really pronounced, right? And when we look at people who end up hooked on these kinds of problematic drugs, whether it's heroin or meth or OxyContin, right? These are not only problematic drugs, but oftentimes they're being used by people in really difficult situations, and these drugs provide an outlet or a relief for those difficult situations. Again, one of the best things we can do is to try not to use these substances, or if we do have to use them, to educate ourselves about them. For a really long time, we have been poorly served and misled by the authority figures around us who tell you never use drugs, they'll screw up your life in these very pronounced and specific ways, when in fact those things aren't necessarily true. One example, I can think of is, like, I went to a high school where the sheriff's deputies came and gave everybody goggles to show you what marijuana did to you, and they tinted everything green and they affected your balance. They're essentially the same goggles they use to show, like, the effects of beer, right? Alcohol's effect on you, but it makes stuff green. The problem is that's not really what marijuana does at all. It doesn't affect your eye-hand coordination in the same way. It doesn't make you lose balance. It doesn't cause you to slur your speech. And the result then is that when somebody does decide to use it, when that scared straight attempt ultimately fails, and they experience it and they say, well, this isn't anything like I was taught like it was going to be like, you're then like, well, why should I trust that I should be afraid of it? Why should I be concerned about it? What if, it's not going to ruin my life the way I thought it was, right? One example I can think of too, growing up, the same sheriff's office told us about how the use of ecstasy caused people to grind their teeth into dust and to overheat and die, and it put holes in your brain. It doesn't do that. But, eroding that kind of trust means that when you run into somebody who tells you about the very real dangers that these drugs might cause, in terms of making it so that you engage in problematic or dangerous behavior, that you're more likely to have unprotected sex, you're more likely to lash out at people in violent ways, you're more likely to get hooked on the drugs, we're not really going to listen to them because they lied to us about what the drugs did in the first place. One of the biggest lies that I think a lot of us were told was about like how we would get hooked on drugs like alcohol, nicotine, caffeine, or marijuana in the first place. That you would be walking away from school and you'd see like the dirtbag kids hanging around by the bleachers, and they'd come up to you and put an arm around you and tell you that you really need to try. Hey, you need to try a smoke, right? You need to take a drag, take a smoke, try a marijuana cigarette, right? And if you wouldn't try a marijuana cigarette, then you would be ridiculed horribly for not, using these things. That's how peer pressure works. And the problem with people like our authority figures, my parents telling me that that's how peer pressure works, is that that's not how peer pressure works at all. That, beer and cigarettes and pot, they cost money. And it doesn't matter, like, how good your dirtbag friend is, they don't want to spend their money on you. Because the tough truth is, when it comes down to falling prey to peer pressure and doing something you shouldn't, nobody's going to push you to do it. You are going to ask them for the opportunity to do it. That you're going to be hanging out with people after work. They might not even be your friends. They'll be your coworkers, and they'll be smoking cigarettes. They'll be drinking some natural light. They'll be passing around I don't know if the term would be J, blunt, spliff, whatever these days, and you're going to want to fit in, right? Like, that's how the peer pressure ultimately works. Nobody's going to push you on it, and you don't need to be prepared to say no. You need to be prepared to fight within yourself the urge to try something that seems exotic and exciting and cool and will help you fit in with people that you know already. Or if you are going to do the thing, you want to make sure that you understand the consequences for making those kinds of decisions. That they might be bad, they might not be bad, but like most of life's choices, the outcomes are complicated and difficult to anticipate. And if the people that we're supposed to trust tell us that, someone's going to try to push this on you and you need to just say no, and if you don't, you're going to be living in the gutter next week, well, we're going to have a hard time contending with the actual consequences of this stuff. So moving on from talking about drugs, I've got a couple of leftover questions here. The first says, why do we have deja vu? Deja vu is not necessarily an altered state of consciousness, but it's that weird earth-shaking sensation you get when you walk into a situation or you're talking to somebody and you feel like, oh my God, I've been here before. For a long time, deja vu has been used as kind of like an example of, maybe we can predict the future or past lives, stuff like that. But in reality, what deja vu is it's a result of the way that our brain unconsciously monitors our surroundings. That if you remember from our memory discussion, you can engage in recall, where you remember things explicitly that happened, or recognition, where you recognize familiar surroundings. And what your brain constantly does is it looks around in the monitors and kind of hits this checklist of things like, are 7 out of 10 things familiar? And if so, I can recognize that this is a situation I've been in before. And deja vu is what happens when you're just on the cusp of something being familiar enough for you to say, yes, I've been here before, but I can't quite identify what it is, right? Versus saying like, no, I've never been here before. I've never talked to this person. I haven't been in this situation. So it's a situation that's just familiar enough to trigger that like familiarity response. Our next question, a couple of questions about zoning out. Is it true that zoning out is a sign of anxiety? Are there specific things that cause someone to zone out? What's going on in your brain when you zone out? People have this really tremendous part of their brain called a prefrontal cortex that allows us to have imagination, to experience a world that's not presently here, which is kind of cool. And zoning out is when we kind of like go live in that space and we daydream for a little while. It's true that zoning out can be a way to escape stressful situations, but also zoning out is something that happens when we're just relaxed enough to be in our flow zone, right? So when you're in that state of flow where you're engaged but not working too hard, where it like feels like you're engaged but not too stressed, it's like you and your math are the same thing. You're playing your video game and you cease becoming aware that you're playing a game. You're reading a book and you're not reading a book anymore. You're just in the story. Like that's the same state of mind that can produce zoning out, right? There's absolutely nothing wrong with this. And if you can harness that can be the seat of creativity for you. What animals come closest to having a consciousness similar to ours? This is a really tricky question and a hard one to answer. The simplest answer would be to say that animals like us are most likely to have a consciousness like we have. So bonobos and chimpanzees are probably the most likely. Though, we talk in our culture quite a bit about the potential intelligence of creatures like dolphins or whales. But a lot of that fascination with cetaceans, dolphins and whales, comes from research in the 1960s with biologists like John Lilly. John Lilly is the biologist who first got us like really interested in dolphins. He dropped acid and went in a sensory deprivation tank connected to a dolphin who was also dropping acid so he could connect with it. Maybe not great, right? He was also famous. He had a researcher live. It was a lady who worked for him. A researcher lived with a dolphin in a house. I don't mean like some stupid sitcom. I mean like the house was partially underwater, so she could wade around kind of like, you know, in chest-high water and hang out with the dolphin and see if they get along. And turns out they did get along really well. And after it came out what exactly was going on in that house between the lady and the dolphin, John Lilly's funding was pulled, and we forever kind of forgot about him, but we kept our fascination with these beautiful creatures of the sea. Important thing to remember about dolphins, whatever else they are apex predators that live in an environment you are not native to. Swimming with dolphins, feeding dolphins, stuff like that. It is like getting in the water with a dolphin is like going in the forest with a bear, right? Like hopefully they won't kill you and you'll have a beautiful, magical time. Right? That's what we hope for. But they are apex predators, right? And whatever like beautiful stories we've heard, they are apex predators. If we think about, for example, you know, again, predators like tigers, wolves, or bears, there are lots of stories of these animals helping people or looking after people or not killing people, but there are also a lot of stories of that happening too. So yeah, consciousness, totally weird thing. We'll talk more about higher cognition in the next couple of weeks and about what it is, if anything, that separates people from animals then. From here, I want to move just a little bit to talking about some of the questions that I got about being successful in class. Your second test is coming up, and I know that a lot of folks want to focus on like, how do you get the grade that you really want to get in the second test? Remember, your two lowest tests drop, but you want to make sure that you're really rolling well by the time you get onto the third one. And so for that reason, I'm going to go ahead and, you know, hit some of these questions here. The first one says, why do I spend more time thinking about studying than actually studying? Which follows up with, what are your best tips to stop procrastinating? The answer to this question is really going to be twofold. First, anxiety, and second, we don't have a solid plan. More and more research seems to show us that people procrastinate not because they're lazy, but because they're stressed. Somebody like me, like work makes me feel really stressed, and I don't like to feel stressed, so I do something that doesn't make me feel stressed, but that puts it off, and then I have to do the same thing, but I have less time, so now I feel more stressed, so I'm more likely to put it off until I have no option but to get it done. This is one reason you'll spend more time thinking about studying than studying, because the studying itself is really stressful. You'll also look back at your previous experiences and say, studying has always been stressful and has never been that helpful. But frankly, our studying techniques are not necessarily fantastic. If you spend 2 hours really stressfully studying before a test or 6 hours studying the night before, that's going to suck really hard, but it's also not a great way to do it. This is why if you can create a specific plan where you like block out time for an entire week ahead of the test, you can use specific study techniques, reach out to me and I'll help you develop some of these techniques. You can give yourself a study experience that doesn't even feel like studying and make sure that you're really well prepared for the upcoming test. If you want to stop procrastinating, one of the best things you can do is to come up with a specific plan. Rather than trying to stop procrastinating, decide what it is you're going to do. A lot of times people say, I'll stop procrastinating. I'm not going to play Minecraft for 6 hours when I get home. But the question then is, well, what are you going to do? What you can do is the same way, like you can harness the same stuff that people do when they do meal planning. Rather than saying, I won't eat junk food for lunch, you say, you know what, tonight I'm going to plan my lunch for tomorrow because I can decide to eat like healthy vegetables now and it doesn't feel like a big deal. Even if I had to make that decision tomorrow, it would suck real bad. You can come up with a plan right now for what you're going to do when you get home from school. You can decide that you're going to get home from school, you're going to watch a half hour of something on Netflix or YouTube and then like get down to work for an hour and then take a break. That's how we stop procrastinating, is coming up with specific plans that help us get the things done that are stressing us out really bad. I'll give you permission to do this too. If you're thinking about how to stop procrastinating right now, I will give you something to do as soon as you get home. Get home, and even if you don't do any other work tonight, send me an email. Send me an email, send me a text message and say, hey, Professor Keith, I'm really stressed out, I'm procrastinating, and I don't know how to stop. It's not a big deal. I do this all the time. I help people with it all the time. We'll figure it out together. When it comes to test taking, here's a question. When it comes to testing, I get anxious and forget things. Yes, absolutely. The relationship between anxiety and performance on tests is a negative relationship, just what you expect it to be, that the more stressed out you are, the more likely you are to forget stuff. right? So one of the best things we can do if we want to perform well on tests is find ways to relax. Of course, some of this you don't have control over. You can't just decide your tests are untimed or that you have more of them. But doing things like studying well in advance, taking 2 weeks, like pretty much as soon as this next test is over, start studying for the next one. That's really awesome. But also doing things like before the test, making sure that you've had something to eat, that you've gone on a walk, that you're not dealing with family stressors. And if you're like, well, I can't help it. Like Monday, I was planning to take the test and my family had this big argument. If you plan to take the test earlier, you have the opportunity to have a really shitty day, not take the test, and then take it the next day, right? That can feel really tough because we'll say like, well, I need that extra day to study. But if you've been studying for 2 weeks straight, what really does one more day matter? You're ready to go. You know it. I know it. You don't need that time. Some of the biggest things you can do to be successful on the tests is to start working as soon as work is available. Because remember, the test is not meant to evaluate how well you studied over the course of 1 day or 2 days. It's meant to evaluate how well you learned everything over the course of 2 weeks. So this coming Monday, for example, you want to start reading the textbook right then. I'm going to have a link down in the show description, down in the live stream description, to the PQ3R method of textbooking. Reading the textbook sucks, but using the textbook to collect information is kind of awesome. Use this technique to get a little bit of work done on your textbook every single day. Watch a video or listen to a podcast every day. Take notes while you do it so that every time you go through, you're putting information from that media right into your head. You're studying and remembering that stuff well, so you don't have to worry about it, right? And then when it comes time for the test, you want to make use of stuff like reciting. Self-quizzing is a really great way to study for a test. And then when you get to the test, lower your anxiety level and get in that test, get it over with, and move on. Another really great thing you can do if you want to do well on things like tests is to get in touch with me, right? Talking with me is a really great way because I work with people all the time on how to be successful in tests. So talk with me and I will help you out. I also know that you guys have your critical thinking exercise coming up on Monday. Remember, your critical thinking exercise is not some like fakey fake bullshit where you slap out like half a page of nonsense about how you tried to drink water and it didn't stick, but whatever, you'll try harder next time. Like, that's not going to get you a whole lot of points, because remember, this assignment is about how well you know course information, how you can think critically about your own beliefs and ideas. Remember, just like how you think about the material you want to learn for the test, for these guys, take a look at the rubric, look at what it is I want you to do, and you will do awesome. Our last official question here. How long does it generally take for you to grade and give feedback on assignments? Somewhere between 1 day and a week and a half. It all really depends on how much other stuff I have going on and how pressing the assignment feels. But if the assignment feels like it's not too pressing, it might take a little bit longer. If it seems like I can get it turned around quickly, I'll try to do it over the space of a couple of days. I always like you guys to have feedback on an assignment to be ready for the next one. But if you're ever concerned, you got something in, you're not sure like whether it got graded or not, reach out to me and let me know. So I think that pretty much wraps it up for our live stream Q&A. As far as like things to recommend, remember these real good jams going on right here are for the Game Chops Video Game Study Lounge. Really great stuff. Really, really good. I like it a lot. Also, if you are a fan of video games and you have not yet played Undertale, the 5th anniversary of Undertale came and went just a few days ago, and it is to this day my favorite video game ever. It's equally good for people who are video game veterans and new to games. If you're already a fan of Undertale, check out on YouTube the 5th anniversary concert. It was a full symphonic orchestra covered the Undertale soundtrack, and it was one of the most beautiful things I've ever listened to. It is awesome. Weather's supposed to be really great this weekend, so go ahead and enjoy that, but do so while staying away from other people, wearing a mask. Pretty much like go enjoy time by yourself outside, because if you do that, you're literally saving people's lives. It is awesome stuff. If you got questions after the live stream for me, remember you can send me a Canvas message, send me an email, call, text, hit me up during office hours on video through Teams or Zoom, whatever it is. You get in touch with me and I'll be there to answer your questions. But until then, I am Ryan Keith, and this is General Psychology, and enjoy a few more minutes of these tunes. I will see you guys for the next live stream Q&A.